12 consultants walked away, but his young janitor solved it in 1 minute. What the single-dad CEO did next. Under the cold, sterile lights of the 42nd floor, the bright vision boardroom felt more like a pressure chamber than a place of leadership. It was 11 p.m. The city below blinked with quiet indifference, but inside the storm had reached its peak. Randy Pierce stood rigid at the head of the long, polished table, his jaw clenched, his usually sharp brown eyes dulled by exhaustion. 34, a single father, and the CEO of one of the fastest-growing media tech companies on the East Coast, he looked every bit the man under siege. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie abandoned hours ago, and his voice, usually calm and measured, now trembled with frustration. 12 consultants, some of the most highly paid minds in data infrastructure, had taken turns outlining the same conclusion in different words. There was no easy fix. Their new platform, launched with such fanfare just days ago, was suffering a catastrophic data sync failure. The user base, hundreds of thousands, was experiencing bugs, crashes, and lost information. "It's a core architecture failure," one consultant muttered. "A complete rebuild is your only real path forward." "That's 3 weeks minimum," another added. "You might patch it to buy a little time, but the user bleed won't stop." Randy pressed his palms to the table. "So we just let it collapse?" No one answered. He snapped, "Is that what I'm hearing? Not one of you can fix this?" The room was thick with silence. One by one, the consultants gathered their things. Apologies were mumbled. No one met Randy's eyes. The last door closed behind them with a soft click. He stood alone in the center of the storm, until a voice, soft but firm, broke the silence. "Excuse me." Randy turned, startled. A young woman stood by the door, in a cleaning uniform, a mop bucket behind her. Blonde hair pulled back loosely, hands still damp from her shift, and eyes wide but determined. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping into the room, "but I think I know where the problem is." Randy blinked, unsure if he had truly heard what he thought he had. The janitor, young, blonde, barely 5 feet tall, with hands still damp from mopping, stood at the doorway with quiet resolve, the muted hum of the overhead lights the only sound in the tension-filled room. For a few seconds, no one moved. All eyes turned toward her, some frowning in disbelief, others simply stunned into silence. Then Randy took a step forward, his voice calm but laced with curiosity. "What did you say?" The girl swallowed, her gaze flickering around the room of exhausted professionals, then returning to him. "I think," she paused, finding her courage, "I think I know where the problem is." Murmurs began rippling through the room like waves hitting glass. One of the junior consultants raised an eyebrow. A tech lead in the back chuckled under his breath, but stopped abruptly when Randy lifted a hand. The room quieted once more. He nodded at her. "Go on." Her name tag, still clipped slightly crooked to her faded polo, read Victoria. She walked hesitantly into the room, her shoes squeaking faintly against the polished tile floor. She approached the whiteboard slowly, almost reverently, like someone who had dreamed of being here but never dared to believe it would actually happen. "May I?" she asked, her hand hovering over a dry erase marker. Randy motioned toward the board. "At this point, we're all ears." Victoria uncapped the marker, took a deep breath, and began to draw. Her lines were simple, circles, arrows, boxes. No equations, no acronyms, just the essence of the issue, stripped bare. She narrated as she worked. "Think of it like a file cabinet," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But someone filed a folder in the wrong drawer. When you try to find it, you're redirected to the wrong place, over and over again." She drew a looping arrow between two shapes. "This is where the cycle begins. The system is syncing outdated data, and instead of replacing it with new input, it keeps looping to the same invalid source. So every time a user logs in or makes an action request, boom, it hits the same wall." She added another circle. "And because autosync is active across the platform, All subsystems are doing this simultaneously, like everyone in the company trying to call the same pizza place at once on one landline. That earned a ripple of laughter. Not mocking laughter, it was the kind of release that came after hours of stress when someone finally put words to the thing no one else could understand. Randy stepped in, folding his arms, expression hard to read. One of the senior engineers leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "She's right, that's describing a core loop error, without even using the term." Victoria gave a tiny nod. "You don't need to rewrite anything. Just turn off autosync for about 30 minutes, re-index the master link structure, and reintroduce the restore commands, but in sequence, not all at once." At the side of the room, a young developer was already typing rapidly, running test commands into the system. The others leaned in, watching the monitors like hawks. No one dared speak. Seconds passed. Then the developer looked up, eyes wide. "It's working," he breathed. "Data flow is stabilizing." Gasps followed. Then cheers. Hands slapped backs. One consultant stared open-mouthed. A programmer let out a whoop of joy. The tension shattered, and the room came alive again, not with panic, but with stunned celebration. Yet Randy didn't cheer. He didn't move. He just watched Victoria, as though seeing her for the first time. She stood quietly, marker still in hand, eyes downcast. He walked toward her, slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was low and reverent. "You just saved this company, with nothing but a marker and courage." Victoria smiled, modest and hesitant, her cheeks tinged with pink. "I don't know if I saved anything. I just remembered something I used to love doing." And in that moment, for the first time all night, Randy felt something more powerful than relief. He felt awe. The next morning, the buzz around Bright Vision's headquarters hadn't faded. Engineers still whispered about the night before, how a janitor had solved the data crash that 12 experts could not. But Randy Pierce, the CEO, wasn't interested in gossip. He was staring at the glass wall of his office, watching the reflection of the woman who had just saved his company. Victoria stood near the door, awkward in her custodial uniform, as if unsure whether she was allowed to enter. Randy gave her a nod. "Come in, please." She stepped inside slowly. Her posture was reserved, but her eyes held the same steady fire they'd had at the whiteboard. "I meant what I said last night," Randy began. "You didn't just help us, you saved us." Victoria smiled faintly, the kind of smile worn by someone who's not used to hearing that they meant. "I just saw a pattern," she said. "Something familiar." Randy gestured to the chairs. "Sit. I want to understand how someone with your mind ended up pushing a mop in our hallway." She hesitated. Then, as if deciding to let her guard down just a bit, she sat. Her voice was calm, but every word seemed like a step through something painful. "I was a data science major," she began. "Northwell State. I was good at it, loved it actually, but my parents, they didn't. My dad's a surgeon, mom's a pharmacist. Tech wasn't something they respected, especially for a daughter. They called it a boys' field." Randy raised his eyebrows. "Seriously?" Victoria nodded. "They wanted me to go to med school, be a real professional. When I refused to switch majors, they cut me off. Told me I was on my own if I insisted on wasting my life." Randy leaned forward slightly, but said nothing. He just listened. "I tried to make it work. Picked up jobs, tutoring, waiting tables, anything. But it wasn't enough. Tuition climbed faster than I could keep up. I dropped out in my final year." Her hands clenched around the fabric of her pants. "This janitor job? It came with stable hours, insurance. Let me keep reading, keep learning, even if no one thought I was going anywhere." Randy was quiet for a long beat. Then he said, "Well, they were wrong. And I'd like to offer you something, an official role. Technical consultant, part-time or full-time, your choice. No mop, no night shifts." Victoria blinked, startled. "You're serious?" "I do not care about degrees," Randy replied. "I care about results and courage. You've got both." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared down at her hands. Her silence stretched longer than expected. Finally, she said softly, "I'm grateful, really, but I need time to think." Randy was surprised. He had expected a yes, or at least more excitement. "Of course," he said gently. "Take your time." But as she stood to leave, there was something in her face, hesitation, almost fear. That night Victoria lay awake in her small, rented room. She stared at the ceiling, the offer replaying in her mind. It wasn't the job she feared. It was everything behind it. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "No man wants a girl who hides behind computers. That's not how families are built." Another memory, her father shaking his head, disappointed. "You'll end up alone, broke, and bitter. Tech won't save you." She had fought so hard to drown out those voices, but now, with opportunity finally knocking, they were louder than ever. What if she wasn't good enough? What if the moment she stepped into a real job, everyone realized she was a fraud? Her heart pounded. She was terrified, not of failure, but of proving them right. And yet, somewhere in her chest, the old fire still flickered. The part of her that used to stay up all night reading coding forums, debugging for fun, dreaming of designing her own algorithms. Maybe, she thought, the dream had never died. Maybe it was just waiting for a chance and for someone to believe. But was she ready to believe in herself? That was the hardest question of all. It was a Saturday afternoon bathed in early spring sunshine. The city park buzzed softly with life. Children squealing on slides, couples walking dogs, and elderly folks soaking in the gentle warmth from scattered benches. Randy Pierce, wearing a hoodie and jeans for once, held the small hand of his 4-year-old daughter, Ava, as they strolled the winding paths near the duck pond. Ava wasn't much of a talker around strangers. She had inherited her mother's quiet nature and Randy's intense eyes, often taking the world in with silent observation. As they turned a corner, she tugged his hand and pointed. "Daddy," she whispered, "that lady has the same book I like." Randy followed her gaze. There, on a bench beneath a budding tree, sat Victoria. Her blonde hair was loosely tied, strands fluttering in the breeze as she read a weathered paperback. She looked peaceful in a way Randy hadn't seen before. No mop bucket, no fluorescent lights, just her and a story. Ava let go of his hand and, without hesitation, made her way over to the bench. Randy blinked. "Ava, wait!" But it was too late. His daughter was already standing beside Victoria, peeking at the book. Victoria looked up, startled for a split second, then smiled. A warm, genuine smile. "Hi," she said gently. Ava didn't answer. She just climbed up beside her, curled her legs beneath her, and stared at the book. Victoria chuckled softly, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small, wrapped candy. "Would you like one?" she asked. Ava nodded and took it with both hands like it was a treasure. Randy watched from a distance, amazed. His daughter rarely warmed up to anyone so quickly, and yet here she was, nestled beside a woman she barely knew, as if they had been friends forever. After a few minutes, Randy approached. "I hope she's not bothering you," he said. Victoria looked up, eyes surprised but kind. "Not at all. She's got great taste in books." "She really does," he replied with a grin. "I'm impressed. She usually takes weeks to even say hello to someone new." Ava tugged Victoria's sleeve. "Daddy, can she come eat with us?" Randy raised an eyebrow. "That's up to her." Victoria hesitated. Her instinct was to say no, this wasn't her world. She didn't belong in casual dinners with CEOs and their children. But then Ava looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes, the kind that hadn't learned how to judge yet. Victoria gave a shy nod. "Okay, just for a little while." They ended up at a quiet diner on a corner street, a humble place with red booths and laminated menus. Ava insisted on sitting between the two adults, and the conversation slowly unfolded, not rushed, not forced. At first it was simple. What Ava liked to read. The ducks in the pond. Her dislike of broccoli. But then something shifted. Randy shared how he had lost his wife to an illness just after Ava turned 2. how he struggled with bedtime stories, tiny hair clips, and birthday cakes that felt too quiet. Victoria listened, her eyes soft but unreadable. Then, when he asked about her story, she told him how she once lived in a rented closet behind a laundromat, how she'd worked 3 jobs just to buy second-hand textbooks, how sometimes the hardest part wasn't being poor, it was being invisible. Randy listened, not with pity but with respect. He saw the steel behind her gentleness, the intellect wrapped in humility. She wasn't just surviving, she was still learning, still hoping, and Victoria, for the first time in a long time, felt seen, not as a janitor or a dropout, but as someone who had something to offer. They walked out into the cool night air hours later. Ava held Victoria's hand all the way to the car. The next morning, Randy was sipping coffee at his kitchen table when his phone buzzed. A message from Victoria. It read, "I never thought I'd work at a place like Bright Vision, but I believe in what you said, and I want to try. Thank you for seeing me." Randy smiled. Sometimes, all it took to change a life was a book, a bench, and a little girl who believed someone told better stories than the TV. The transition was quiet but powerful. Victoria showed up Monday morning not with fanfare, but with a second-hand laptop tucked under her arm and her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Her ID badge still read Contract Consultant, Tech Support, but to many, she was still the janitor. Assigned part-time hours with the data analytics team, Victoria was tasked with assisting in logic error detection, primarily in the back-end systems. The company's platform had grown complex, layered with years of patchwork solutions. It was like entering a house built by too many architects with no common blueprint. But Victoria saw it differently. Where others saw chaos, she saw structure waiting to be uncovered. In meetings, while senior staff explained issues with elaborate graphs and acronyms, she would quietly step in after and reframe the problem in plain English. "It's like trying to send a letter but forgetting the zip code," she once said, pointing to a faulty API routing sequence. "It's not broken, it's just lost." New hires often turned to her, drawn by her patient demeanor and ability to explain without judgment. One intern, after Victoria helped him troubleshoot a crash loop, whispered in awe, "You should be the one teaching the training." But not everyone was impressed. Some mid-level managers scoffed behind her back. In break rooms and Slack channels, whispers circulated. "From mopping floors to data analysis? Must be nice to have the CEO's sympathy. Maybe she's just a pet project." Victoria heard it all. She always had sharp ears, but she said nothing. Instead, she came in early, stayed late, and kept solving problems no one else had time to untangle. Then came the Wednesday review meeting. It was a monthly presentation where consultants pitched efficiency models to streamline internal operations. One team, full of Ivy League grads, launched into a 15-minute spiel thick with jargon and flowcharts. By the halfway mark, eyes glazed over. A junior manager yawned. Randy sat with a polite smile, but even he was losing track. Then, Victoria stood up. She walked calmly to the whiteboard, uncapped a marker, and drew a single box in the center. "This is your user," she said. Around it, she drew a few circles. "Here's the login process, the purchase loop, the recommendation engine. But right now," she tapped the board, "they're all optimized in isolation, not for the person in the middle." Silence fell, no buzzwords, no graphs, just clarity. She drew arrows connecting the circles, redrawing the platform as a flow that began and ended with the user's experience, not just back-end logic. When she finished, no one moved. Then someone clapped, then another, and then the room erupted in applause. Randy, standing in the back, didn't clap immediately. He just looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. It wasn't admiration, it was something deeper. Respect, perhaps. Recognition. When the meeting ended, Randy approached her near the coffee machine. "You didn't just explain the problem," he said quietly. "You made them care." Victoria looked up, a little shy, a little amused. "I just wanted them to understand." He nodded. That's exactly what this place has needed. That night, Victoria stayed late, as she often did. The office was quieter, and she worked best in silence. But something was different now. She no longer felt like a guest. She belonged. Not because she had a title, but because she had earned trust, the kind no resume could buy. And in a company full of talkers, she had proven the quietest voice could still lead the room. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, just 3 days before the company's long-anticipated product launch. Victoria had been entrusted with the final quality assurance sweep, a meticulous data integrity check before the new feature went live. She had flagged a potential conflict in the autosync protocol the night before, submitting a detailed report to the project leads. But no one followed up. And now, during the live test in front of investors and media partners, the system froze. Not once, but twice. The room had gone cold. Immediately a murmur rose among the managers. Fingers began to point, quietly at first, then more directly. It was her module, right? She's only been here a few weeks. What did you expect? I said from the beginning, this is what happens when you hire someone without formal training. Victoria stood at the side of the room, frozen. The screens around her blinked in error. She could hear every word, every doubt. Her breath caught in her throat. It felt exactly like the day her mother told her she was wasting her life, the day her professor said, "You don't have the background to succeed in this field." It was all echoing back. A senior project manager approached Randy later that evening. "We should reconsider her role. She's talented, but she's risky." Randy did not reply. That night, Victoria packed her things in silence. She left her badge on her desk. There was no resignation letter, just the quiet folding of someone who had learned too many times that belonging had an expiration date. But as she reached the elevator, a small voice called out behind her. "Miss Victoria?" It was Ava, Randy's daughter, in her pajamas, clutching a drawing. "I made this for you." The picture was simple, stick figures under a rainbow. In bold crayon letters, it read, "Miss Victoria is my hero." Victoria knelt down, her eyes misting. She took the picture in trembling hands and pressed it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Ava simply smiled and hugged her. Victoria did not leave. The next morning, she walked into the meeting room, badge reattached, head held high. She waited until the room was full. Then, with quiet conviction, she stood and opened the report she had sent days earlier. "I flagged this error before the test," she began. Page 3, Section 2. It outlines exactly where the failure point would occur if the auto-sync was not decoupled from the new feature. She clicked to the next slide. The data was clear, time-stamped, verified, silence, then murmurs. Then Randy stood up. He turned to the table of managers. His voice was calm but firm. "Next time," he said, "listen to the people who actually know what they're doing. No anger, no raised voice, just truth." Victoria felt her chest rise with something she had rarely felt in rooms like this. Validation. Not the kind you begged for, the kind you earned and finally received. And for the first time, someone in power did not ask her to explain herself. He simply stood by her side. The days that followed were quieter, at least on the surface. The storm of the product launch had passed, leaving behind the calm routine of post-release tweaks, user feedback, and back-end stability checks. But underneath that predictable rhythm, something new and fragile was beginning to grow. Victoria and Ava became nearly inseparable after hours. What began as a single walk to the ice cream truck outside the office turned into a series of small, sacred rituals. One day, it was a shared cup of hot chocolate on a chilly afternoon. The next, it was a story read aloud beneath the great elm tree near the company's garden bench. By the end of the third week, it had become a rhythm of its own, unspoken, cherished, and quietly healing. "Want to hear a story about a girl who built her own robot?" Victoria would whisper as they sat cross-legged on a plaid picnic blanket. Ava's eyes would always widen with excitement. "Yes, but only if she names it Waffles." Victoria would chuckle, tapping the girl's nose. "Deal. Robot waffles it is." They had their own world now, one stitched together by laughter and gentle questions, and it was during one of those sun-drenched afternoons as they shared a cup of melting strawberry swirl that Ava looked up with curious eyes and asked, "Miss Victoria, how come your house doesn't have anyone like Daddy and me?" The question came without judgment, just pure, childlike wonder. Victoria's spoon paused midway. She glanced at Ava, then out at the trees swaying gently in the breeze. For a moment, the hum of nearby laughter and birdsong filled the silence between them. "I used to have a family," Victoria finally said, her voice low and steady, "but they didn't believe I could do big things. So I left. Or maybe they left me in their own way." Ava blinked slowly and leaned her head against Victoria's arm without saying anything. Her small gesture said it all. Unbeknownst to them, Randy had been watching from a few steps away. He had come to bring Ava her water bottle, but paused when he overheard the exchange. Something inside him pulled tight, not out of pity, but out of recognition. He had known loss too, disapproval, isolation, and now, standing there, he saw something else. A bridge forming between his daughter and this quietly extraordinary woman. That evening, as the city began to glow in amber hues and office lights flickered on around them, Randy walked Victoria to the subway stop. The sidewalk buzzed faintly with life, but their steps were slow, unrushed. He cleared his throat. "Would you have dinner with me?" Victoria glanced sideways, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "You mean to talk about the database scaling issues?" He laughed, the sound warm and disarming. "No, I mean dinner. No shop talk, just two people. Maybe three if we let the tiny chaperone join us." That night, seated at a modest bistro tucked between two bookstores, they shared a meal that had little to do with food and everything to do with opening doors they both thought were long sealed shut. They did not discuss analytics, projections, or user interfaces. Instead, they spoke about things rarely spoken aloud. Randy confessed his fear of raising Ava alone, of always second-guessing himself, of feeling stretched too thin between meetings and bedtime stories, trying to be both father and provider, and often feeling like he was failing at both. He spoke of his late wife, the moments he still reached for her in sleep, and how hard it was to smile when his heart still missed half its rhythm. Victoria listened, her gaze soft, steady. Then she shared her own truths, not with drama, but with quiet courage. She told him about the night she slept in a storage unit after her scholarship was revoked, about the cafeteria job that paid for a single programming course, about scrolling through online courses late at night, her fingers blistered from mopping but her mind hungry to learn. And she told it not as a tragedy, but as a path walked by choice and grit. Somewhere between a second glass of chamomile tea and the silence that followed a long laugh, Randy reached across the table. He took her hand, not as a boss, not as a benefactor, but as a man who saw something precious in a woman who had learned to carry her own light. Victoria looked down at their joined hands for a moment, then back at him. In his eyes she saw no expectations, no pity, just peace, and in her touch, Randy felt something he had not known in years. Hope. 6 months later, the atmosphere at Bright Vision had subtly but unmistakably transformed. The sterile intensity that once hung over the data lab had softened into something warmer, more collaborative. Laughter was more common during lunch breaks. Engineers volunteered to mentor interns without being asked. And every so often, someone new, whether an assistant or a seasoned tech lead, would say, "Hey, let's run this by Victoria. She has a way of making things clearer." Victoria Blake, who once mopped the very floors she now walked with calm authority, sat at the head of a long, rectangular table in the strategy room. Her fingers moved swiftly over flowcharts and graphs, her eyes scanning streams of code and performance data. Around her, the room was full, but no one interrupted. They waited, listened, respected. Her nameplate now read, Team Lead, data intelligence. Yet her desk told a different story. A thrift store ceramic mug with a chipped rim, post-it notes layered in color and chaos, most covered in whimsical ava-doodles of stick robots and happy suns. She wore her usual sneakers, the same cardigan with frayed cuffs, and her ponytail was tied back the way it had always been. But it was not what she wore. It was the weight her words now carried, the quiet trust that followed her wherever she stepped. She never raised her voice to be heard. She never needed to. She brought 2 sandwiches to lunch, one always wrapped in wax paper, just in case someone forgot theirs. She helped interns debug their scripts by sitting beside them, never over them. When someone struggled to grasp a system concept, she would lean over and say, "Let's think of it like plumbing. Data flows. If something blocks the pipe, where would you check first?" Then came Friday. The company's massive conference room was filled wall to wall, the lights dimmed slightly, the hum of conversation lowered into anticipation. Randy Pierce stood at the front, tailored, calm, confident. His eyes scanned the crowd before speaking. "I want to talk today about vision," he began, his voice rich and grounded. "Not the product name, not the quarterly reports. I mean the kind of vision that sees potential before the rest of the world catches up to it." He paused. "There are people in this world who've always had the keys, who've always been allowed to speak first, be seen first. And then there are those who've had to fight to be noticed, people who were told they don't belong, that they're too poor, too underqualified, too ordinary." A hush fell. "I'm proud to announce Bright Vision's newest division, a training and development branch focused on identifying and nurturing the kind of talent that doesn't come with polished resumes. A place where people can rise not because of where they started, but because of what they're capable of." Behind him, the projector screen lit up. Bright Future Initiative Director Victoria Blake. For a heartbeat, the room was utterly silent. Then, like a ripple breaking into a wave, applause erupted. Loud, sincere, sustained. Victoria stood slowly, visibly moved. Her gaze swept across the crowd. Engineers, marketing execs, receptionists, cleaning crew, interns. Some were smiling, some had tears in their eyes. Every single one of them stood, applauding. She placed a hand over her chest, nodded once, and sat back down, eyes shining. Later that evening, after most of the building had emptied, Victoria lingered in her new office, a level higher than the floor she once mopped during midnight shifts. The city lights stretched out before her, dazzling and endless. Once upon a time, they'd felt unreachable. Tonight they glimmered like old friends. The door opened with a quiet creak. She turned. Randy stepped in, hands tucked in his pockets, tie loosened. "Big day," he said with a smile. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "I never thought this would be real." He walked closer, laying a hand gently on her shoulder. "It is. And you made it so." She turned to face him fully, emotion flickering in her eye. "You believed in me, when I couldn't even see myself." He shook his head softly. "I didn't believe. I saw. That's different." They stood there, the silence between them filled with everything that had gone unsaid. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," he replied, his voice roughened, "for staying, for showing us who you are." Just then, the sound of light footsteps came bounding down the hallway. "Miss Victoria!" Ava's voice rang out as she darted into the room, her backpack bouncing behind her. "You're still here!" Victoria knelt and opened her arms. "Of course I am." Ava beamed, thrusting a Tupperware into her hands. "I brought cookies. Daddy says it's your big people day." They all laughed. Randy offered his arm. "Ready to go home?" Victoria glanced from his face to Ava's hand wrapped around hers. Then she smiled and nodded. They walked out of the building not as CEO and team lead, but as something more, as something whole, as family. If this story stirred something deep within you, if it reminded you that courage comes in quiet moments, and that sometimes the most overlooked people carry the brightest light, then you are not alone. Victoria's journey from unseen to unstoppable shows us that no dream is ever truly lost. All it takes is one person to believe, one moment of courage, and 1 second of being seen. If you believe in the power of stories that heal, that inspire, and that remind us of the goodness in humanity, then we invite you to join our growing community. Because sometimes the right story at the right time can change everything.